So back in 2005, I think it was, a philosopher named Harry Frankfurt wrote an essay called On Bullshit, followed by another called On Truth.
Yeah.
And On Bullshit, he basically argued that bullshit was more dangerous than a lie because a lie respects the existence of truth by opposing it, whereas bullshit just comes out of nowhere. So going back to the election of 2016, Mark, did you actually think
we've got a bit of both? We've got a bit of both, I think, really.
Do you think there would come a point where the New York Times would actually have to remind people that truth existed and mattered?
There was a moment in the summer of 16 where Jodi's boss, my colleague and friend Dean Baquet, used the word lie of one of the candidates, Donald Trump, on the home screen and front page of the New York Times. That's definitely a moment. I mean, it's the Times had kind of assumed that you didn't have to call it out that way, and I think one of the things we saw was that fact-checking, which once had been a kind of piece of duty in paragraph 9 or 12 or whatever, had to go into headlines. The president falsely claims that, or claims without evidence that. And the other weird thing that happened was the direct and rather brilliant real-time interaction with this particular president, who's now tweeted specifically about the New York Times more than 200 times. Not always positively either.
Right. So what was the moment where you actually thought, hey, we're going to enlist people like Darren Aronofsky and tell our own story and remind people?
Well, actually, it happened literally within about a week of the election. And I thought, I mean, the president-elect came out fighting very strongly, specifically against us, rather bizarrely, then came around to lunch with us. But he came out very strongly. There was a lot of defense out there. The Times has got many passionate friends and supporters, and there's a lot of defense of us. And the whole battle over this phrase, fake news, who owns the phrase fake news, and do you call me a perpetrator of fake news, or do I call you? And all of that was, and it was rather brilliantly and adroitly turned by the president to be a way of labeling actually serious journalism fake news. So I by early December after the election had thought, you know, we better get out there and tell our story and explain what we want to do in our own words. And I kind of rang up the marketing department, a guy called David Rubin, and said, you know, if I gave you $10 million, what could you do? And the truth is hard was what came back. It's a brilliant campaign.
Fantastic. So Jodi, first of all, congratulations on the Pulitzer.
Thank you.
It's a week old at this point.
Thank you.
An Emmy, a Pulitzer, I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong here. As a journalist, what did it feel like as the fake news thing started to kind of grow, as you saw a lot of hostility towards the media in certain environments? Did it make the job feel different than it had before?
I felt a sense of overwhelming responsibility and anxiety, and I thought a lot about how to be equal to the moment. In the months before we started on the Harvey Weinstein story, we started about a year ago, in late April of 2017. I remember thinking, I have this precious seat at the New York Times investigative desk. I have the money and time that so few journalists in this country have to do deep investigation. And what am I going to work on? Because there are so many problems. It's actually overwhelming right now to decide what to focus on. And also my fear after the election is what will have impact? I mean, between the fake news problem and also the feeling that so much is wrong, that it's hard to even be outraged anymore because we see so much in society that doesn't work. How am I going to pick the thing that people will actually care about?
Right. So how did you pick the thing?
Well, through really the Times' deep commitment to investigative reporting, what happened is that I know it seems like the Bill O'Reilly sexual harassment story was a lot of sexual harassment stories ago, but it was really a key one because Emily Steele and Mike Schmidt, they spent 8 months working on that story from August of 2016 to April of 2017. And And that story really ended up being seminal in a lot of ways. First of all, because they were able to come up with a kind of new model of sexual harassment reporting where we used the settlements that the person had paid to women as a kind of legal and financial trail, as evidence of, wow, these allegations have been accumulating for many, many years. And second of all, because of the impact, the idea that the top-rated host in cable news could lose his job because of these allegations, it was actually shocking at the time. And so that is when Dean Baquet and the other editors said we have to make an even bigger commitment to this kind of reporting. And so lots of reporters fanned out in lots of different fields to do this story. My story was the Harvey Weinstein story, but my colleagues were working on Ford workers at factory plants. They were working on what was going on in Silicon Valley with women entrepreneurs, et cetera, et cetera. So I would say in a lot of ways, the kind of seeds of the journalism that led to the Me Too movement, the editors and reporters were planting those as far back as last April.
Fascinating. Yeah, and right now, cheerleaders.
Cheerleaders, right? Which I think those are really important stories because as cheerleaders go, so go the nation.
Right.
I mean, if the cheerleaders are getting upset now, it's really significant.
So you mentioned this, and obviously, your reporting and the reporting of others helped kick off the Me Too movement. We've got a number of the founding partners founders of the Time's Up movement here today, and others. Were you surprised that this moment had become such a tipping point? When you wrote these stories, you knew they might have the impact they did, but there's so much of a sense with a lot of these stories that we kind of knew this and nobody was talking about it. What is it that you think made it such a moment?
We've been staggered every single day. So much has happened that it's almost hard to process even for professional information processors. I think one thing that's really important in looking at the roots of all of this is that, we don't take a partisan approach. And part of the power of our reporting was that it was on the left and on the right. It was Bill O'Reilly and it was Harvey Weinstein. And it was, it was factories, it was Silicon Valley, it was all these different fields. So what we were able to do is establish this greater pattern and say, this is everywhere. This is not just about one industry. And these women are so different, these movie stars on the one hand and these restaurant workers in another, and yet they all say such similar things. And obviously the culture had been leading up to this for a long time. I mean, we just saw the Cosby verdict last week, and women had been talking about Cosby since, I think, 2006. And nothing had happened. But we saw with that and with Ailes and with the concern over the president's comments during the presidential campaign, more and more concern had been building over time.
Right. Now, Mark, obviously the New York Times is, if any journalistic organization has stood for editorial integrity over 170 years, it's the New York Times. But any concerns as things like the Harvey Weinstein story started breaking? I mean, clearly that studio must have been a large advertiser for the New York Times over the years, as are some of these other companies we're talking about.
What's interesting is we're so far from that. I mean, I was well aware that the story was happening. There's no way in God's good earth we're ever going to stand in the way of reporting what needs to be reported. And I want to say, and this is true in the aftermath. I mean, it's an incredible story. We've got a fantastic photograph of Jodi and the rest of the team, mainly women, gathered around a terminal as they press publish. We knew it was going to be pretty big. It's like 100 times bigger, 1,000 times bigger than we thought. But this is a moment where our colleagues inside the building are watching us, our customers are watching us, and doing the right thing and being held to account for doing the right thing, I think for all of us, but also for all of our advertisers and all of our brands, matters more now than ever. It's like the stakes are very high, and you can't rely on the public reacting today the way they would have done a year ago. I mean, in a weird way, the Trump elections are different. I mean, many people think it's completely... But big surprises, really big surprises are happening every day now. So I think the business of doing stuff that you can kind of morally get behind and feel comfortable seems to matter more now than ever.
Right. Now, I was a journalist for most of my career and big believer in objective journalism, but there are people who, a lot of my English friends in particular, who will swear there was never such a thing, because journalism is practiced by humans, and humans bring themselves to everything they do. How much do you feel, and I'd love you both to answer this, because Jodi, you were saying there's so much wrong right now, so much you could focus on. How do you kind of balance almost maybe a need and a responsibility to be more activist as a media brand versus the need to obviously maintain objectivity?
I'll let Jodi answer this properly, but I just want to say, I don't think we want to be activists. We want to be objective reporters. We've got opinion pages, but in our reporting, we want to be just straightforward reporters. Thank you. And we want skeptical readers. We want readers to question us. We want readers who don't just read the Times, but read other news sources and are questioning and thoughtful about what they read. What's interesting, though, is the hunger to try and understand what's happening in our rather confusing, frightening world is greater than it's ever been.
I think we can affect so much more change with facts and unbiased reporting than we personally could with activism. If we had run like a little italicized thing at the end of the first Harvey Weinstein article saying, rise up against, sexual harassment across the land, I feel like that would have diminished the message in some way, because our goal is to report the truth, and by the way, also to be fair to the accused, which is very important. And if you're an activist, people won't trust that you're being fair to the accused. And to put the information out there for the public to decide what to do with. And in this case, that was such a dramatic example, because what we really experienced with the Me Too moment was our reporting and working so hard and under so much pressure to document those allegations over the summer. And then when we published, the fact that women all over the world stood up and said, you got that right. I experienced that either with Harvey Weinstein or with another man, or when I was in high school, or my mother told me a story like that. That was so much more effective and powerful for them to say, this echoes my own experience and you got the facts right, than for us to be seen as pushing some sort of message.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for coming. Mark and Jodi, please join me in welcoming. Thanks a lot. Thank you.